we are excited to have with us another interesting guest with another bit of interesting history to part of Louisiana and actually to the world. But I guess I met our guest today online first, and then I got to actually meet her in person back in April. Our guest, as I mentioned, is Anne Harmon Brett. She's author of The Disease, One Man's Journey with, let's see if I can show it there. You can show it better. Through
Yeah.
leprosy. She's president of the Friends of the Carville Historic District and co-creator of Leprosy, the Separating Sickness Traveling Exhibit, which is going to be kind of the big basis of what her talk is going to be about today. Anne, welcome to the Rainy Cajun.
Good to be here.
Anne has put together this wonderful history about her father and her mother, and I guess maybe give us a little bit background, Anne, on yourself, and then kind of lead into how you would with start of the presentation.
Well, my family, there were 7 people in my family that had this disease that is commonly called leprosy, but the scientific word is Hansen's disease. And we prefer using that. And in our house, the word leper or leprosy was never, ever used. It was always called the disease. And when I named the book, The Disease, it was because I didn't come up with a title. My dad had his memoirs that he had done was a 250-page paragraph that he had done, stream of consciousness, whatever was in his head, that's what he wrote about. And so my degree's in journalism. So I said, Daddy, would you let me write the first paragraph? I'd like to kind of tidy it up. So I did, and I gave it to him to read, and he actually threw it at me. He was not happy with me. So I waited 17 years to publish the book, and I cleaned it up and added the photographs. But like I said, in my family, there were 7 people. On my dad's side, there were 2 people, he and his older brother. On my mom's side, it was my grandmother, my mother, 3 uncles, and a great aunt, and they all went to Carville. My mother went to Carville when she was 10 years old.
Wow. So into a little bit background, your father grew up in Texas, near Beaumont, maybe?
Between Beaumont and Houston, a little place. You've heard of Winnie, Texas? Well, it was right there. They were saddle makers. They made Western saddles.
Okay. And then your mother was in the Vacherie area.
Yeah, she grew up on a sugarcane plantation called Golden Star. My grandfather was a blacksmith. My grandfather was illiterate, but my grandmother, who I never knew, she was educated in a convent. She could read and write both French and English. This area was, the Cajun French. So she was very educated, and she actually would give medicine to people. The doctor would give her the medicine in case he wasn't there. He was a traveling doctor, and he would give the medicine to the people. She would give the medicine to the people.
As you already alluded to the fact that your mother was 10 years old, and when she contracted it, and so what would happen at that point when they found out she found out that she had, as they were calling it then, leprosy? What events occurred after that?
Well, to give you a little bit background, my grandmother she wasn't feeling good. So she went to the health unit in Edgard, Louisiana, which is not just up the river from here, down the river. Mm-hmm. And they diagnosed that she had leprosy. So they sent her immediately to Carville. She didn't have a choice. The police took her, the sheriff's office took her to Carville. My grandfather, he comes home from working in the fields, and he walks in the house and he sees his 4 children, no food, no wife. He got on his horse and he went to the sheriff and he said, "Where's my wife?" And the sheriff said, they took her to Carville. My grandfather did not know what Carville was, and he would find out that he would never see his wife again. And then 2 years later, my mother and she came up with symptoms of the disease, and her little brother, Andre, who was 4, they were sent to Carville. And the saddest part in the book is when my grandmother finds out that her children are there. She
Oh,
was sitting under one of the porches, and she heard children laughing. And she looked down the hallway, and the Mother Superior had my mom on her right and little Andre on her left. And when the children saw their mother, who they had not seen in 2 years, they ran towards her and collapsed in her arms. And she started
wow.
crying because she knew the fate of her children. 2 months later, another son showed up, and then there was one little. Oh, and in the meantime, the police or the Vashri community. I'm not sure if it was public or private. They burned our house down. My grandfather lost his job, and he went to work for a plantation in Napoleonville. And not Andre, Claude followed him. Claude did not have the disease, and but little Claude was by himself. He was only like 10 years old. So he would go to people's houses and beg for food and ask sometimes to sleep because my grandfather was working in the fields. So the authorities felt it was best that he go to Carville and be with his siblings. And so that's what happened. He's probably the only patient at Carville that did not have the disease, but it was the best thing for him to be with his family. But in the meantime, my grandmother does die. And you don't die from this disease. It doesn't affect the vital organs, but she did die and was buried in the cemetery at Carville. And then little Andre died when he was 6 years old. He had kidney problems.
So this would have been what year? 1920
In
something?
the 40s.
In the 40s? Okay.
Yeah,
So
1932 was when my grandmother went in. Yeah.
okay, so 1932. So
Yeah.
to give everybody a little context, Carville is located on the Mississippi River, um,
20 miles south of Baton Rouge,
20 miles south of Baton Rouge on the east bank, right?
Mississippi. Hmm.
All right. And so, and this may be a good point to kind of start giving a little history about it, because it was a former plantation itself, and it had dated back to what, 1890 something.
1894 was when the state of Louisiana bought the plantation. It was called Indian Camp, and it was just the main plantation house, which was designed by Henry Howard, who is a very famous Louisiana architect. He built
Mhm.
Nottoway Plantation and Maidwood. And because there were patients, Hansen's disease patients living in New Orleans, and they had a leper home for them. And the people in New Orleans did not like that. So
Hmm.
they sent the first 7 patients upriver on a barge in the middle of the night, and they settled in Carville and started to live there. And they lived there for 2 years without any medical attention. Nobody would come in because they were afraid of the disease. And it
Hmm.
wasn't until 2 years later that the Daughters of Charity came in to take care of these patients. And
Wow.
then in 1920 was when the state of Louisiana, when the federal government took over the facility. And the name Carville comes from James Carville, famous political analyst.
Hmm.
His parents lived there, and his grandfather was the postmaster in Carville.
Okay.
And the Carville family, especially James's mother, they loved the patients and they would spend lots of times with them. And the facility itself is over 300 acres, and there's a barbed wire fence all around it. You could never
Yeah.
leave. You were sent there, and that's where you stayed. So this is
So
the title panel of the. We have 19 panels, and they're made of metal. And we travel the state of Louisiana trying to educate people. My father is standing there with his Graflex camera. He loved cameras. He never went anywhere without his camera. And this shows you some of the dormitories. These were the women's dorms that surrounded the facility. They had dorms for men and women. And we'll see actually a map that my father drew of all the different buildings.
so this would have been so you already talked about that they started with 7 patients in the 1890s, and then the Sisters of Charity came, and by 1920s, this would have been the outgrowth here of the work from the 1920s and beyond.
Right.
The
That's when the
building.
federal government came in, and the WPA came in and started building these concrete buildings. They're absolutely gorgeous. And The facility is still there today. There are no patients because they found a cure for the disease in the 40s. And so the patients didn't have to stay there. And it's now the Louisiana National Guard headquarters for the Louisiana National Guard. And they're doing a great job of keeping it up. This is a painting that my father did of his image of the first patients arriving by barge in the middle of the night. They came upriver. You can see there's a couple that are holding on to each other. And my father, he says that's he and his wife. Yeah, they had a Louisiana leper board, and Dr. Dyer from Tulane, he was the one that, he really wanted to take care of these people because they were so ostracized.
Yeah, I mean, 1890s. I mean, there if people don't. I mean, once again, it's a lot of people trying to fathom. I mean, obviously, no electricity would have been in that area. It wouldn't have had any running water. I mean, it was basically, of course, living in the plantations wasn't all that, other than unless you were at Nottoway, where it had a lot of lot more niceties. I mean, it was pretty rough, and then on top of that, to be ostracized out here and just have to rely on yourselves, I guess the seven. I mean, I don't know if they gave them supplies or anything, or if they just.
I'm not real sure. They did have a doctor who would come in periodically to check on them, but he finally quit coming. So they were pretty much on their own. And when
Wow.
you have this disease, it affects the cooler parts of the body, your hands, your feet, your eyes, and your nose. And a lot of them really had crippled hands. And it was hard for them just even to make a live.
Yeah, because I
Things that we
mean, like
take
I
for
was.
granted.
I mean, because we got it pretty cushy today for most of us, and rarely. I mean, we'll all hit our hands or stub our toes or get a paper cut or something every so often. But I mean, if you're living very rurally like that back then, just to survive, I'm sure the frequency of those injuries would have been much more than what we see today. And then on top of that, with their condition, it worsened things
Yep,
even more for them.
yep. Living in the wild wasn't easy for anybody.
No, no.
So the thing about this disease called leprosy is the myths and misconceptions surrounding it. And briefly, there was a doctor named Dr. Paul Brand. Dr. Brand was from England, he and his wife, and he was an amazing physician. He won an award from the Queen of England, it was like the Medal of Freedom that we give to our people, but it was a high award. And Dr. Brand said that basically leprosy in the Bible, in Leviticus, referred to any skin disease. And it was a priest, not a doctor, that examined a person that had leprosy. So it could have been somebody with eczema, psoriasis, whatever. They would label it as leprosy. And my dad, this is a drawing. By the way, all the drawings and paintings are done by my father. They changed the name, but they haven't changed the disease. And movies like Papillon, Ben-Hur, those kind of movies, and the word leper was used. I was in Europe on a bus trip, and I got bronchitis, and they put me in the back of the bus. Another man was also sick, and he was back in the bus with me. And the tour guide came in, and she said, "Well, how's everybody doing?" And the man sitting next to me said, "Us lepers are doing fine." And my husband looked at me, and he said, just kind of looked at me, and I was like, okay. So at the end of the trip, I gave him my business card, and I said, "I'd like for you to read this book." So even today, if you want to really criticize somebody, that's the word you use.
I mean, I can think of those type of things where, I mean, and basically the message is, unclean or ostracized
Yep.
away, and try to, you want to, and that's obviously what ended up happening, and that's why obviously Carville was formed, because they didn't want these individuals nearby,
Right.
and wanted them out of sight, out of mind, basically.
Yeah. And
Um,
it's not contagious. It is communicable. 95% of the population will never get this disease. It's the least contagious of any disease.
mhm.
The husband and wives, the wife might have it and the husband won't.
Wow. So
And
the
in our family, my, 7 people in my family, and not one of my generation, our kids or our grandkids have it.
wow.
And it's not hereditary.
So we've talked about in the intro. I was talking about your dad, and you talked about how your mother came to Carville, and like I'm just marveling, thinking at the fact I knew he was a photographer, and I knew from the book about his drawings, but I was thinking about his paintings and his multi-talented. Uh, he was a multi-talented man in many respects. So tell us a little bit about him when how his journey to Carville occurred.
Okay. His brother, there were 5 siblings, and his older brother, um, he started showing symptoms when he was a young boy. And at that time in the 1930s, people didn't know anything about this disease. He would one in the beginning of the book, I talk about when they were children, how he would sew his fingers together with a needle
Oh wow.
and pull a string through it, and it was like a magic show. And the kids all thought that was hilarious. But it got worse and worse, and he started showing symptoms of the nodules and the things that you think of when you think of this disease. And they finally took him to a dermatologist in Houston, and he diagnosed it. And so they put him in a rail car, and in a band. Nobody was in the rail car. He was isolated all by himself, and drove and took the train to Carville. And a year later, my dad, who was also 24, he went in when he was 24. And my dad, a year later, he was always concerned that he would get this disease. And sure enough, one day he was a draftsman working for the Texas Highway Department. He leaned his elbow on the when you did a drawing. This was all hand drawn, and he leaned his elbow. And it was kind of like a cellophane paper, and he looked at the paper, and they had blood on it, and he
Oh
didn't
wow.
feel it. So that's when he
Mm.
knew that he had it. So he was also sent to Carville. So it was just the two of them, and then he died. The brother died a few years later. So
I think his name is
that's
Elmo, right?
Elmo. Yes, Elmo. And he was very
So,
distraught. He said, "I am a good-looking man. I am smart. I do not need to be here. I'm going to do everything in my power to get out of this place." But you'll see
mhm.
what happens to him.
So yeah, so it's I mean it's an interesting two different type of I guess communities and their stories because like you said, your mother, well, your grandmother had it later, or I said later in life in her I guess 30s or 40s, but
She's in her
your
40s.
mother got it as a child as well as her siblings, and then your dad and his brother got it in their 20s.
Right. And Elmo
So
probably had it when he was a young boy, but they just didn't know what it was.
so they both arrived sometime in the 1930s then to Carville
Right.
in
1934.
1934. So um, as we'll find out looking at the other panels, one of the things that's really fascinating to me about this story is the fact that uh, in the subsequent panels you'll talk about just the day to day life about it. But I think this one first is goes back a little bit more with the history and gives a lot of credit to the individuals who made tremendous strides in improving the quality of life of these patients and
Correct.
maybe even preventing making not just I guess I mean they gave them their I say a life back, but they gave them the dignity that they deserved as well. Plus the findings probably have, even though it's still a disease today that's people will still get, perhaps you can early identification is an important thing to reduce the severity and maybe prevent in some cases, I guess, if they figure out
It's a,
some of the
it's very
causes.
slow. It's a very slow moving disease. It takes a long time for it to come into your body.
So we have you were talking about the Daughters of Charity at Carville.
Right. They came in. Dr. Dyer from Tulane. He came in and he asked the Sisters of Charity, the Daughters of Charity, sent a letter to their headquarters in up north, and over 100 nuns volunteered to come and work at Carville, and I think 4 of them did arrive. And Dr. Dyer said this was a place of refuge, not reproach, a place of treatment and research, not detention. So he really did care about these people, which I think is really amazing that he, the took them in and really helped these people. And then Dr. Faget, he came in. He's also from Tulane, and he in 1940 was at Carville. Now these doctors and staff lived on the property. Dr. Faget discovered that promine shots reduced the deformities of the disease, and it was considered the miracle of Carville. So if you look at this lady, the very first photograph in 1941, and then in 1947, look what she looks like, a beautiful woman.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
that was only from taking the medicine. So it was a cure, which opened up a whole different world to these people. So they eventually, in the 50s, they started letting people leave Carville.
Wow.
And so the
Yeah.
disease affects the skin, but it also affects the nerves. And a lot of people think that their fingers fall off, and that is not true. Their fingers do not fall off, their toes do not fall off. Dr. Brand, I mentioned him before, and Dr. Margaret, they were at Carville from 1966 to 1986. And Dr. Brand was the one that says leprosy merely silenced the pain. Further damage came about as a side of painlessness. In other words, all subsequent damage was preventable. So when he graduated from medical school in London, he and his wife moved to India, and India still does have a lot of leprosy. And he was walking down the street with another doctor, and he asked the doctor, he said, "Who are these people begging on the street?" And the doctor said, "They're just lepers." And this really impacted Dr. Brand. So he started gathering these people up and taking them to the hospital. Well, in India, there is a very strong caste system. And the people in the hospitals did not want these patients, these leper patients, in the hospital.
Good.
So Dr. Brand decided to take these people, and he created this hospital, probably the first hospital specifically for leprosy patients. And he also started a school for young boys so he could study them 24 hours a day. And the boys, he taught them how to use hammers, and he would wrap the hammers in foam rubber so they wouldn't hurt themselves, because it was the injuries that were causing their fingers. They were being, their bones and nerves were being absorbed into their bodies. And so that's why they had the claw hands. And when you think of people without the fingers, it's only because they're going back into the fingers. So the boys did really well. He said, be sure and check yourself every morning and every night. Well, eventually the boys kept coming in, and they had sores on their body, and he couldn't figure out what the sores were. So he said, okay, you sleep and you watch him sleep, the roommates. And what happened was, in India, there are rats, and the rats were affecting the boys. So he told the boys, he said, I can fix this problem. And he was very creative. He gave each boy a cat. And he said, now you sleep with the cat. Never let this cat out of your sight. And it solved the problem.
Wow. That's
And
pretty
his
inventive.
wife, Dr. Margaret, she was an ophthalmologist. And she was a world authority on how this disease affects the eyes. We have a natural tendency to blink our eyes. It cleans our eyes. Well, people who have this disease, they don't have that blinking ability. So infection sets in, and they eventually go blind. So what she did, very creative, she took the nerve endings, some nerve endings from the mouth, and moved it to the eyes so the eyes would blink. And she gave him a pack of gum and said, chew this gum, and that'll help you to remind you to blink your eyes. So they were they thought outside the box. I mean, and Dr. Brand literally traveled around the world constantly trying to educate people about this disease. He was considered one of the top hand surgeons in the world. He The hand is the most difficult part of the body to work on because there are 27 bones just in your hands. And he
Wow.
performed 15,000 hand surgeries in his lifetime. They were amazing. And these tools over here, those were tools that he invented for the patients. He was a carpenter before he was a doctor. And the one that looks like a cigar, that is
Hmm.
actually my mother's one that she would use to button her blouse because
Oh,
she
wow.
couldn't put the buttons through that little hole, and other instruments. And that's a can opener that they would pound the holes in the can when you opened up your cream
Okay.
for your coffee. So they were
I,
quite an amazing couple.
yeah, I was, I was thinking as you're going through this, a couple of things, and I mean, the main thing that amazes me is that how much, because I'm obviously Dr. Brand and his wife both are both doctors, I should say. They did a lot before they came to Carville, but I was just thinking of the other two doctors and all the discoveries that were made, because obviously, like you say, this is something, whether it was diagnosed correctly or not in biblical times, but I mean it's been around for millennial, and yet it's only been in the last 130 plus year, 130 years, the strides that were made in Carville, and through the work that these four individuals, well, and plus with the Daughters of Mercy or Charity, excuse me, did. So I mean, once again, I just let that sink in a bit. The impact that that has had on individuals that contract this disease, and the fact that within 130 years time, or
Yep.
probably less, actually within 100 years time, these individuals who contributed so much to solving problems and even coming up with cures. So I mean, it's
Yeah.
like I said, just it's very. Like I said, just take a moment and think about that.
Yeah.
I know you have,
Exactly.
but I mean everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey.
So the Daughters of Charity came to Carville in 1896, and they were there for till 2005 when the facility actually shut down completely. These habits that these sisters wore were made of wool, and you are in South Louisiana. Think
Hmm.
about that. And the sister on the left, that is Sister Hillary. She was a scientist, and she spent many, many years. After she left Carville, she went to Japan and did even more research. And she was the
Wow.
one who actually taught my dad photography, really refined his skills in
Oh,
photography. And you can
wow.
see some of these beautiful pictures, especially the one of the sisters. They were clerks, they were medical records directors, but the most important thing that they gave the patients was empathy. And because when you are diagnosed with this disease, it is the stigma. A husband
Right.
will drop off his wife, a mother will drop off her child and never see him again. And you're separated from your family. And people went through great depression, and the sisters were there to comfort them. And that was one of the most important things they did. And they were just wonderful people. And when we got older, my brother and I would go to Carville, and these sisters were just amazing people. They were just
Mhm.
lovely. We were very fortunate to have them.
Yeah, the habit definitely catches your attention. Of course, my first thought is the Sally Fields Flying Nun series from the '60s, as far as that style of dress. But yeah, when you think about it, the hot Louisiana, I can imagine rain pouring down because those obviously were starched, I'm guessing.
Well, the habits themselves were starched, but the hats were extremely starched. I mean,
Yeah,
they wore these things. It's amazing that they could wear that in the heat of the summer. I just cannot. Hey, hey, hey. But anyway,
yeah.
well, one of the things that's really amazing about this is that no staff member ever got the disease, and
Wow,
they were
that is a big
dressing the
point.
wounds of these patients. So think about that. When people say, "Oh, it's contagious," well, why didn't any of the staff members get it? Dr. Brand said once that if he could give his patients only one gift, it would be the gift of pain. He actually wrote a book about it called The Gift of Pain. What what he was saying is that if you have a rock in your shoe, you're going to take that rock out. But a
Hmm.
person who has this disease can't feel that rock. And they keep walking on that rock, and infection sets in and everything. And I'll give you an example. My mother did not have any feelings in her hands, and she was a fanatic for cleanliness. And one time she was washing dishes in the sink and had really hot water. The water was so hot that the Playtex gloves melted on her hand. She had second
Wow.
degree burns. Dr. Brand had to repair her. Second
Wow.
time, she was in the kitchen and she was washing a crystal vase. And crystal is very thick. And she looked into the water and it was all red. She had cut her tendon and she didn't know it.
Eesh.
The feeling of community in this place was unbelievable. Everybody just got along. And I mean, there was gossip and, when you get 400 people together, you're going to have some issues. But all in
Hmm.
all, everybody took care of each other. And I don't think religion, they just obviously all had a strong relationship with God. But because
Hmm.
of their situation, they probably felt closer to him than we do.
This is the home. This is their home. And these pictures illustrate it. I guess the first one I'd really like to zoom in on, Jeremy, is the house there, because that's a very interesting story there, too.
Yeah. My parents got married. Daddy built this house and my dad loved junkyards when junkyards were really fun. I remember when we were in Vacherie, there was a junkyard, and it was good junk. It wasn't plastic bags. It was, he went through the federal government was redoing one of the buildings and he went through the junk pile and got windows and siding and doors and sinks and bathtub, and he built this house with the help of other patients for $1,000.
He built the house because he and your mother married. And
Right.
so, that was one thing. What was the whole thought or about marriage? And I know you'll talk about, well, there's pictures there of y'all as children,
Right.
as child.
But
So tell us about that.
okay. So my dad met my mother. She was 12 years old, and my dad was 24. He actually
Mhm.
taught her school at Carville, and he waited 16 years to marry her. And by that time, she was a lot older. And
Mhm.
they were married for 51 years. They decided to get married. Well, the administration said, no, you don't need to get married. And my dad said, too bad. So they escaped through a hole in the fence that they had over this barbed wire fence, and they had a hole. It was where a culvert was, and so the patients would go in and out of this hole all the time. And they went to New Orleans and got married, and they came back, and the administration said, "Well, you're married now. There's nothing we can do about it, but don't have any children." And my dad said, "Watch me." So within 2 years, my mother got pregnant. Well, this creates a major problem because you can't have children at Carville. My dad asked her, well, Aunt Beulah translated and said, would you take care of my baby? And my grandmother said, bien sûr, je vais prendre la petite. Yes, I will take the baby. So that was settled. Well, my mother went into labor in Carville. They drove her to New Orleans in labor, 70 miles, to have the baby. After she had the baby, she was sent directly back to Carville and could not hold us or touch us for a year.
Wow.
And they didn't want our birth certificates to say Carville on it. So that's why she was sent to New Orleans. So my
Wow.
dad and my mama drove to New Orleans and picked up my brother. A year later, and Johnny was in an isolation unit. He was in an isolation unit all by himself in a nursery. And a year later, same thing for me. So I'm 1 year older than he is. So
I mean, a thought just struck me is that, because like you said, they once they were there, they really, they couldn't leave other than, like you said, some of the instances where they either went through the fence and maybe got to New Orleans or Baton Rouge or something. But the fact is that they weren't traveling all over the world, but yet between the cultures that came together, they
yep.
got to experience the world in a limited form, but they got to experience what.
And then the color picture of the two babies, that's my mother and my brother and I. So We lived on Golden Star with this Becknell family, and we lived with them and never ever lived with our parents. But they lived on the river, which is about 10 miles away from Golden Star Plantation. So we were close by. But when we were little children, the Becknell family would drive us to Carville up the river road, 30 miles, and my parents would go through the hole in the fence, and we would wait for them behind the levee, and we would have a picnic on the levee, and then they would go through the hole in the fence, and we would come back to Vacherie, and that's how we got to see them.
So the last two pictures are inside your parents' house. Is that right?
Yeah, my parents' house became the party house where people would play cards, and they would, you know, do all kinds of fun things that people do. The map shows where the patient side was. Where you see that fence, that's where the staff lived on the other side, but they could not cross over. But they did. I mean, it was no big deal. And then the plantation house, that is the where the sisters lived when they first got there. And that was the one Henry Howard built. When the sisters got there, it was dilapidated. It didn't look anything like this. And the sisters went in to kind of fix things up with the patients. So you have these sisters in their beautiful outfits, and then you have the patients with their crippled hands trying to clean this place up. And one time they opened up a closet, and inside the closet were all these snakes, all intertwined. And so the sisters and the patients had to get rid of the snakes. So after that, the sisters slept with cane knives under their beds. And then this big picture, that's the infirmary. It's now a hotel. The National Guard uses it at a hotel for when they have training and that sort of thing. And you can actually stay there, but you have to have credentials. You just can't, make a reservation. You have to be related to the military or have some, real reason to be there. Because we had a situation where a young man stayed there and in the middle of the night decided that he was going to go ghost hunting. And he posted it on Facebook of all these different things that he found at night at Carville. And that's when we created the Friends of Carville Historic District, because I met with the National Guard and I said, this cannot happen again. And the National Guard was 100% behind us, because this is not... this is holy ground. This is not a place you're going to be doing this kind of stuff. And it's a military facility. You should not be there in the first place. So that's why they've really tightened the rules on who can stay there and who can't. You really got to show some credentials. And then the front gate, you had to go through the front gate. And sometimes people would, before the 1950s, they would leave in the trunks of cars or go through the hole in the fence. But I wanted to talk about the dormitories. These were the dormitories that were built for the patients. But really interesting is these walkways, beautiful walkways that were screened in, so the patients could leave their dorm room, go to the cafeteria, go to their medical apartment, go to church, and they would never touch the ground. 2 miles of two-story walkways. And if you look at the wheelchair, if you look at really close at that wheelchair, you see something different. See where his hands are?
Uh-huh.
So what they did was they moved the handles up and covered them with foam, because when you're in a wheelchair, you can get your hands caught in the spokes and hurt yourself. So they invented this wheelchair where they just move the handles up. They thought of everything.
Yeah.
I mean,
and
when you go to Carville, I will tell you that when you walk those walkways, you feel a spirit there. You really, really feel a spirit. And my brother and I went, we were giving a tour, and I turned to my brother and I said, we were walking down the hallway, and I said, "Do you hear that?" He said, yes, I do. And there was a couple. She was blind and he had lost his legs. And he eventually, both of them lost their legs and both of them went blind. And they would go down the walkway and they were tapping their canes against the wall. And you could hear that tap, tap, tap. And Sam was a musician and he would sing and they would laugh. And it was just, that memory of them is they were always laughing and smiling, and but they both. He says, "I'll be your eyes, and you can be my legs."
Okay. So like you were talking about, they would party at your parents' house, but they,
They had a
you know,
canteen.
yeah.
And the interesting thing about the picture in the canteen is you notice one man has his back to the camera.
Uh-huh.
And when reporters would come and do stories about Carville, they would never want their picture taken. They would always turn their back to the camera. Because they knew my dad and he was one of them, they let him take pictures wherever he wanted to take pictures. But I know who this guy is, and I think he was mad at my father. So he has his back to the camera.
There.
Crawfish ball, my uncle's on the left and my mom's on the right. And the lady in the center, she's Chinese. We called her Nanan Grace. And she had very clawed hands. You can look at her fingers and see how they're clawed. But she could knit like you would not believe, and she could peel crawfish
Wow.
faster than anybody. So children were not allowed at Carville, but a lot of the children were patients. Well, any child there would have been a patient. And you can see the picture with the first communion. That's my mother and three of her brothers surrounding her. And the sisters really kind of took over the kids. They pretty much raised them. And the old, when my grandmother died, the Nan Grace, the Chinese lady, she was the one who became my mother's surrogate mother. She took care of her. And little Andre's in the front. He was such a cute little boy. And the boy,
Mm-hmm.
the next picture in the middle, that's the boys had gone out in the back of the swamp and killed them a big snake, and they each had a gun.
Wow.
They did what boys do.
Yeah.
And
Let's
then the
see.
picture with the dog with the bicycle, that's Andre. He, like I said, he went there when he was 4 and he died when he was 6. And this was one
Wow.
of the Mardi Gras that they did. This was actually in Baton Rouge when they closed the facility. But the patients loved Mardi Gras because they could put on a costume and put on a mask and be anybody they wanted to be, and nobody would stare at them. And that was the big issue. You can see all the different costumes they had. And then the floats, a lot of the social organizations like the American Legion and the Lions Club would help the patients make their floats. And these boys were actually part of the Boy Scout troop at Carville. And like I said, it was the first integrated school in Louisiana, was in Carville. And they would carry these floats all through those walkways. And notice how everybody was so well dressed. And that was the thing. You look at the canteen picture and everybody's got
Yeah.
suits on. I wish people would know how to dress. And then
Yeah.
this picture, my dad, he was king of Mardi Gras in 1928. He was 27 years old. And then in the year 2000, he was 69 years old. Yeah, he was 89. He lived to be 91. Yeah. And then
Wow.
the royal court. I mean, this looks like something you'd see in New Orleans or Mobile.
Yeah.
They were all dressed very nicely. Yeah, they tried to keep the patients busy. So the sisters would have a picnic for the patients in the summertime. And then this ball, this is an amazing photograph that I had never, ever seen before. When I went through 200 of his photographs. And this ball is in the center of the picture. Isn't that incredible?
Yeah. That he
And
got her.
yeah, I captured it. And then the patients about behind the lady, behind her, the sisters, and behind her, the oak trees. Beautiful, beautiful oak trees. The baseball team only played home games. They could never leave. And the teams would have to come to Carville. And then on the left is a woman playing golf. They had 2 golf courses, one for the patients and one for the staff. The doctors did not like their course, so they played on the patient side.
So I had heard when I mentioned when it's like 2010 when I was doing work in St. Gabriel's when we had driven by the facility, and I remembered people telling me because I guess I had heard about Carville. I can't remember if I'd already interacted with some of the folks in Vacherie online or whether it was from some other source that I'd read. But I remember that was one of the things like, oh yeah, they got a really good golf course out there with people.
Yeah. And this is Lake Johansen. It was named after one of the doctors that everybody loved. They dug this lake and the people would go boating, swimming, and fishing. And there's Sister Hillary with her Graflex taking pictures.
Wow.
Yeah. And everybody had a Cushman scooter because this was before golf carts, and they would get around the 300 acres on their little golf carts. I love the man in the back. I love that bathing suit he has on.
So this okay. Well, this talks. I guess maybe this will segue into it too. But we've been talking about the community inside of Carville and a lot of the leisure, but then there's a lot of businesses as well.
Yep. You couldn't leave, so everybody started their own businesses. The canteen was run by one of the patients. This young man is selling fruits and vegetables on the sidewalk. My father started his photography business. He did pictures for the patients and the staff, and he also did souvenir postcards for visitors. And then the barber, this is one of my favorite pictures because it really shows the difference in the disease. There are two different types of leprosy, and my father had the least one. My mother had the most one. And the man in the chair, you can really see the disfigurement in his face. But look at the barber. They're both patients. So it really shows the difference.
Wow.
Yeah. Because the man in the chair is when you think of the disease. And then the beauty shop, that you could get a perm, a manicure, and a haircut and get all the latest gossip. And there was always a lot of gossip. My parents paid for nothing. They didn't pay for food. They didn't pay for rent. They didn't pay anything.
So yeah, and so part of the other part is that this is some of the stuff that your dad did as far as because they were there during World War II
Right.
and
Daddy drew
Vietnam and such. But
cartoons for the Star newspaper, which was their in-house publication, and this really shows you that the patients were very patriotic. They bought war bonds, but they could never serve in the military. They were not allowed to serve in the military, and yeah, and then the people below these are war heroes that were from Carville. So Major Hornbostel and his wife, they were in the Philippines during World War II. He was in the Bataan March, and she was actually a POW in the Philippines. She contracted the disease, and they
nope.
took her to Carville. And so Major Hornbostel said, "Well, I'm just going to stay here with my wife." And they say, "No, you're not. You're not a patient. You can't live here." So he got an apartment outside the gate, and he would visit his wife during the daytime. But rumor has it that they would see Major Hornbostel go through the hole in the fence early in the morning. So,
Okay.
and then Joey Guerrera, she was a Filipino native, and she contracted the disease, and she became a spy for the U.S. government because the Japanese were afraid of her, and she could go in and out of enemy lines without being detected. And she would bring the army maps and inside information of what was going on. And she gave some information about a minefield that she knew about, and they found out about it, and she saved many lives because they didn't know the minefield was there. She's a real pretty lady. Yeah, I don't know how old this map is because I think it's changed a little bit, but all the dark areas are where the highest rate of the disease is. Hawaii, of course, has a lot, but even Alaska, up north, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and those areas, New York City, Florida, Louisiana, Texas, California has a lot, Washington State, Oregon, and just pockets in other parts of the country. But I spoke at an international infectious disease conference in New Orleans, and I was talking to one of the doctors, and she said that one of the major states now is Arkansas. Mostly port cities is that
Yeah.
along the coast, but it's all over the world. India, those kind of countries really have a lot. Japan has 13 leper colonies on different islands. And Dr. Hansen's disease, he was from Norway. The Star newspaper was an in-house publication that was started by Stanley Stein, the man with the dog. Stanley was a brilliant man. He came to Carville and was very upset about the use of the word leper, and he tried to get more people to use the word Hansen's disease. But the interesting thing about Stanley was he went blind because of the disease, and he also did not have any feelings in his hands. And he couldn't read Braille, but he was the editor of a newspaper. And he said, instead of bemoaning the things that I have lost, I try to make the most of what I have. And the masthead of this magazine, The Star, was designed by my dad. And the picture that he took, the woman in the center is Helen Keller. And next to her is Anne Sullivan. They came to visit Carville. When I was a little girl, Helen Keller was my hero. I could not read enough information about Helen Keller. But my parents not once told me that they met Helen Keller. To this day, I can't understand that. I mean, Helen Keller, she's world famous.
Yeah. So you've kind of alluded to, you talked about, you opened with this story about your family on both sides
Right.
having the contracted the disease, and the depiction of your dad painted of his of your mother's house, or her childhood home, I guess.
On Golden Star, yeah.
Yeah.
So that shows you the Harmon family. You can see there were 5 children, and 2 of them got it. The parents did not. And then my mother's side of the family, my grandmother had it, and she went to Carville, and she was 44,
Yeah, I
44
think
years old.
that's what it shows at 44. Yeah.
Yeah, and but the other children died when they were young. Yep, and that's when Daddy had his 90th birthday. We had a family reunion, and that was kind of neat. And Daddy always said that I feel like I had a richer and fuller life than most people, because I'm at Carville. I met people from all over the world. It was a mini United Nations. I created lifelong friendships. That's the King of the Microbes. When Daddy wrote his book, he named it King of the Microbes, and he would pedal his 3-wheel bike down those hallways and sell that book to everybody he could talk to. But he
Yeah.
had disease for 67 years when he was
Wow.
first there. And that's the Microbacterium lepragerm magnified 115,000 times. And I mentioned to you that the head of research, he and my dad became very close friends. And that's in the electron microscope is in his lab. He let my dad look at it. My dad
Okay.
was always interested. He never quit learning. He never had a college degree, but he was pretty smart. He read all the time, and he had a math mind. But he loved Beethoven. He loved P-51 Mustangs. And when he wrote his book, that was interspersed. And I think I mentioned that it was a 250-page
Yeah.
paragraph. Oh,
Uh,
this is the cemetery.
yeah.
There is a cemetery at Carville, and Sister Frances de Sales, she was a beautiful sister. And my dad, this is so funny, he said he had a crush on Sister Frances, and he said, that would be a hell of a thing if a leper married a nun. It's like, Daddy, really? There are more than 700 men, women, and children buried under the trees. Their patients' headstones engraved with only their hospital assigned number and assumed name. So when you came to Carville, they changed your name. That's the first thing they asked you. My
Wow.
mother never changed her name, but my dad became John Harris. And in the book that you mentioned, Neil White's book, he talks about John Harris, but because it was my dad, he did not want to use my dad's real name. Yeah,
As
these
the
are some
last
of the
panel.
books
Okay.
that we recommend because there have been many novels written about Carville, and a lot of that has been plagiarized from our stories. And so these are factual books that were written. The disease was written by myself. The Art of the Shadow of Leprosy, Claire Maines, she and I put together this exhibit. Claire's from New Iberia. She had 5 people in her family that had it.
Wow.
And then Carville, Marcia Godet, she is from the Edgard, and she did a really good book about the patients. Gift of Pain is the book I recommended by Dr. Brand, an excellent book. I highly recommend it. Carville's Cure, Pam Fessler was with National Public Radio, and her father-in-law contracted the disease. This is a very good research book. I recommend that book a lot. And then Triumph of Carville was a PBS documentary that was done several years ago, and my parents and my brother and I are in the documentary. And it's
Okay.
about an hour long, and it talks about everybody was pretty much alive then when it was done.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Because I mean, like, it. Of course, we're older than the current generation of folks, but I mean, when you think back about it, it only closed 20 years ago, and I mean, a lot of these events were obviously in your life, but in mine and Jeremy's life too. That a lot of this was still, these people were alive and thriving in this facility or outside. But so you, when your dad and mom got older, did they remain in Vacherie or did they go back to Carville?
No, my mother had a lot of health issues beyond the disease. So they decided to move back to Carville and got an apartment. And the government, like I said, paid for that apartment. They did not pay for anything. And then in the 1990s, late 1990s, the federal government said this place is way too big for just a handful of patients that are left. Because some patients never left. This was their home. That one patient, he went there when he was 10 years old and he died when he was in his 80s. I mean, that was his house. That's where he lived. So the government said, we give you two options. You can take a $34,000 a year stipend that they would give you, or you could stay there basically till you die. Well, my dad, being a mathematician, figured out what $34,000 a year was going to get you. And he said, no. He said, you put me here, you're going to take care of me. So that's what they did. They stayed there. My mom passed away at Carville. She was being interviewed. My dad was being interviewed by Newsweek magazine, and the PR lady came in and said, Mr. Johnny, she said, I have some bad news. She says, Miss Anne just died. And my dad, being my dad, bowed down his head and said, she was a good woman. Now, what's your next question? He loved being interviewed, but they were married 51 years. So he was getting frail, and his emphysema was really setting in. So they moved the last handful. There were probably 12 patients left, and they moved him to Baton Rouge to Summit Hospital. And they all lived on one floor of the hospital. And then gradually they all passed away. And Daddy died in 2001. He was 91 years old. Lived a very full life.
How many people today or a year still contract?
200 people a year in the U.S. get the disease, approximately 200. And in other countries, it's a lot more because they don't get the medicines that we have here. Right. And today, you take a multi-drug therapy. There are 3 different medicines that you take. And within a year or two, you're cured.
As you illustrated with the woman from the best place in the world, in the United States to go.
Oh, yes, definitely.
If you suspect you're contracted this disease.
Yeah.
That's part of that. That's what the part of the story in your interview. I mean, it's not just, it's the whole thing about the Carville and what occurred there, but then also the fact that your dad and y'all's family's impact is being part of the Vacherie community too.
Right.
I mean, it's like I said, there's these, as I said, and we've got them in South Alabama and throughout the Gulf Coast and throughout the United States, that there's these pockets of places or stories that maybe the locals know about, but then they really have worldwide impact, and you don't really know because they don't get they don't garner the high profile type of notice, but yet there's an interest and there's lessons still to be learned from their lives and from how people treated and how they persevered and such. So,
and in educating people, I told you that I do this presentation on the American Cruise Line. And
so I was going to get
the interest of these people, these passengers, is unbelievable because they go right by Carville on the way up or down the river. And it is amazing, the questions, and just people are so fascinated. And I was telling you, I had one man who came up and he had tears in his eyes because he said his brother was at Carville and he never went to visit him. So he had all this guilt of not going to visit his brother, which is really sad. Yeah, because Carville was a happy place. I mean, we would go there on Easter Sunday and have a big crawfish boil under the oak trees, and a lot of the patients would come over and visit, and then they would come to Vacherie. And I remember when we were little kids, we used to dance for them. We were little, they were like 10 years old, and they loved being, because there were so few children there. One more story that when I was on the boat, this lady came up to me and she wanted to buy a book, and I said it's $20, and she said okay. I said, well, where are you from? And she said, I'm from Michigan. I said, I've never been to Michigan. I said, I've been to 45 states and Michigan is on my list. And she said, well, you need to come visit me. I said, oh, okay. 2 weeks later, this woman called me and said her church wanted me to do the presentation at her church in Michigan.
Wow.
So I flew to Michigan just to do this presentation. She was 80 years old. I stayed at her house. We went to Mackinac Island. It was the greatest thing. So if anybody would like for me to go to Wisconsin, North Dakota, South Dakota, with Indiana, and one other one. Oh, that's it. Four. That I can travel with the exhibit.
Yeah.
It's it's not the actual physical exhibit; it's the presentation.
Right.
So, yeah. So
Yeah.
if you know
Well, I
anybody
think
who's
that,
looking, or
yeah,
even in
I hope,
Alabama.
yeah. Well, I hope people will take you up on it because, I mean, I think it's, like I said, I learned a lot, and I hope people watching the episode will continue to share it, and we'll post all the ways, like I said, especially your
Yeah.
books and your
Yeah.
contact information.
But I have to shout out to Jay Scheck-Snyder. He with the Genealogical Society. He is doing such a great job. He's a
Oh, yeah.
one-man operation. He's an amazing young man. And I do talks like the Rotary Club, a lot of book clubs. I do talks. And I've never had anybody walk away not saying, "Wow, that was something that I never thought about." Yeah, it's really summer, and the whole point of the presentation was the humanity, and that's the thing we really stressed is the humanity of these people. They were people like you and I that just happened to have a disease. They created no crime, but put behind a barbed wire fence. That's the sad part. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but they didn't know, and still today, and I think the word leper will always be around. And unfortunately,
Unfortunately.
So I just kind of grin and bear it, So, David and Jeremy, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Technical difficulties worked out. So.
Yeah, we can always get through that stuff. The only thing we can't get through is if the internet goes out, but we figured that part out too. So everything's good.
Smart guys. Okay.
Well, thanks for coming
Y'all
on.
have a good day.
Yeah, you too.
You too, Anne. Thank you so much. Thank you for all your work.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.